Thank you, Wendell, and my deepest appreciation goes to Wendell and the elders of the church here for allowing me to participate again in this program. The only complaint that I have on an afternoon when the Dallas Cowboys are playing, to be speaking in the late afternoon when that game is just winding down and forbid that it should have gone into overtime, I was just afraid that I might be here with maybe Wendell, I wasn't even sure, maybe Wendell, and then 42 tape recorders, that all of you would have just sent tape recorders and said, I'll get it after the important stuff is over. I don't know how the game has turned out, and if it should be that Dallas loses, it would be another instance to include under the problem of evil for some Texans, I'm sure. The problem of evil involves the difficulty of reconciling the presence of suffering and sin in our world with the omnipotence and even more so the goodness of the God in whom we Christians believe. While the Christian points to a number of phenomena that we believe are inexplicable apart from God, the marvelous order and design of this universe, the moral consciousness of man, the atheist, in turn, points to a number of phenomena that he believes are inexplicable with the presence of such a God. Cancer, automobile accidents, where people's bodies are torn and they have to undergo extreme periods of pain, surgery, and recuperation, and perhaps never are fully recuperated. They may bear scars, injuries, impairments. Such negative phenomena as animal pain and human suffering, and death, and man's inhumanity to man. The atheist says those things simply cannot be reconciled with the existence of the God in whom you believe. David Hume, in his dialogues concerning natural religion, makes the teleological argument fairly well and says, I'm impressed by that, but in this world I not only see evidences of harmony and order and design, I also see a world of suffering and misery and agony and soul-wrenching grief. How can those things be if there is a God in heaven? Why would He create such a world? Why would He allow such phenomena? Tuesday of this week, I received a letter from a lady who read a book that I had written some time ago, wrote me at the address on the back of it, the church address, and told me about the plan she'd made for her suicide. Because life has just become unbearable. Where is God? She asked. Last night, at about 8:15, my phone rang. My little boy answered it, called me up, and it was a precious teenage girl, a senior in high school. She identified herself and she said, I just don't know if I can even believe in God anymore. An abusive father, problems within that family, heartache the like of which no little girl at her age should ever have seen, and she is the object of it. How can I believe in God, she said, when my world is filled with so much agony? I don't know about you people, but I can't laugh at that problem. And some of the glib, cliche answers that have been thrown back to the question of evil are not adequate to people who are really in the throes of it. What do we say about suffering and evil and sin in a world created by a merciful God? The plan of this study tonight is not to examine all the approaches that men have taken to the problem of evil over the years, and neither is my purpose to examine all the biblical texts that would be relevant to the issue. Rather, because of the theme of this lectureship, I'm going to limit myself to 3 major Old Testament texts that address the problem of evil and give insights which are necessary to its resolution. Specifically, I'm going to focus on the contributions made to a Christian's dealing with the problem of evil that come from the books of Genesis, Job, and Habakkuk. But first, let's set the problem and some of the things that are necessary to solving the problem of evil, and then go to the biblical text. Although we speak of the problem of evil, most of us who address the problem make a distinction between two types of evil: natural evil and moral evil. And since the biblical approach to this problem and the resolution of the problem has to recognize that distinction, we need to clarify that at the start. As to the range of things envisioned by natural evil, we mean things like deserts and icebound areas, animals of prey that eat one another and under some circumstances even devour human beings. There are pests like flies and fleas and scorpions. There are parasites like tapeworms and hookworms. And there are natural calamities that leave so much suffering in their wake: fire and volcano and flood, mudslides in California. And then there are diseases that torment human beings. There are things like leprosy, polio, or the more contemporary scourge, perhaps cancer. Diseases like that, and watching people that we know and love suffer and waste away from them, or having that happen to you, makes you wonder, how could God create a world where this sort of thing can occur? And then, of course, there are the evils with which some are born. Physical deformities, misshapen limbs, blindness. Most of these evils contribute toward increasing pain and suffering in the world, but frankly, not all these physical evils are reducible simply to pain, and most of the things that I've named would still be classified as evils if there were no pain associated with them. How can a God of love and mercy and infinite power create a world where things like this can exist and plague us? Well, first, we need to remember that natural evils are not intrinsically evil. Now, a thing that's intrinsically evil is something evil in and of itself, evil under all circumstances. Natural evils are not intrinsically evil. They may very often be instrumentally evil. They may lead to some unfortunate end, but they're not intrinsically evil. Take pain, for example, the paradigm case of a natural evil. Pain very often is an instrumental evil. It may cause someone to hit his thumb while he's trying to drive a nail, and the pain would cause him to use God's name in some blasphemous, unholy way. It has become an instrumental evil. Pain there led to some evil end. But it's not intrinsically evil that our bodies are capable of pain. Very often it's an instrumental good. The fact that we're capable of pain is what warns us when we're getting too close, say, to a hot stove, to back away before we're really hurt, before that skin tissue is burned and scarred, before something happens to us that might even take our lives. If it were not for the possibility of pain, just a tiny little grain of sand would get into a human being's eye and it would blind him by the cutting and scratching and scraping that it would do to the inside of that tender eye, were it not for the fact that pain immediately alerts us to take some action to get that harmful body away from that tender, sensitive eye. Pain is what causes the person with an inflamed appendix to seek medical help before that appendix ruptures and kills him. And the same rain that may in some instances create a flood and sweep away a home also purifies the atmosphere and makes this planet habitable for human beings. Natural evils are not intrinsically evil. The only intrinsic evil in all of human experience is sin. Sin is the only thing that under all circumstances is intrinsically bad. But we'll have more to say about that later. In the second place, with regard to natural evils, we need to be reminded that the element of circumstantial freedom necessary for man to have as a rational creature in a world designed to challenge man, to be an environment for soul-making. That sort of freedom occasions many natural evils. For example, it's a good thing in our world that there is enough circumstantial freedom that we can make mistakes. If there's not enough circumstantial freedom even to make a mistake, there's nothing to be praised in the person who's careful, say, in designing and building something. If he can't design a bridge that could collapse, then why should he be careful, and why should we praise the one who does his job well? There has to be enough circumstantial freedom that we can make mistakes. Engineers may very carefully design a jetliner, but they may calculate incorrectly the amount of stress that a span of wing or some bolt holding the wing span together can bear under certain conditions, and unintentionally create an instrument of death. Any number of daily decisions that we make about where to go to school, how to invest our money, personal relationships, can result in immense suffering for ourselves due to our inability to know a lot of things that are yet to happen in the future. There also has to be enough freedom for us to do things that we even know are against our best interest and that may result in suffering. Some years ago, people out of ignorance might have smoked cigarettes without knowing the harm that it would do to a human body. In fact, cigarettes were touted 50 years ago as being a health aid. With the evidence we have today, a person who smokes cigarettes is told by the Surgeon General on every pack that he buys what he's letting himself in for. It's dangerous to your health. But we have enough circumstantial freedom that even though we know certain things may not be good for us, we're free and we can do them. And if a person has lung cancer as the result of it, he'll suffer terribly. God's not to be blamed for creating a world where there's enough circumstantial freedom that we can make even the honest mistake, or we can do things that we know are against our best interest. And third, we need to be reminded that natural evils are inevitable possibilities in our world simply because this is a contingent world that operates with predictable regularity. In other words, this is to claim that many, if not most, of the natural evils that occur in human experience are due to what Reichenbach calls the rational exigency that God create according to natural laws. Now here's what that means. Given the existence of any contingent world, any created world, any world that is not self-sufficient to itself, a benevolent and powerful deity, all benevolent and all powerful deity even, cannot eliminate the possibility of natural evils within that world except by constantly intervening by a miracle to keep any unfortunate consequence from following an action we may perform. But if the world in question was brought into being precisely for the purpose of providing intelligent creatures, an environment for their rational and moral development, frequent miraculous intervention can't be allowed. Because that sort of tampering with the functioning of a contingent world, well, for example, it would destroy the possibility of science. If it just is not the case that a car leaving the highway and hurtling toward a tree with the driver having fallen asleep at the wheel, if it's just not true that there's any danger in that, God's going to intervene. He's going to make the car just bounce right off, no harm done to the automobile, to the tree, to any innocent bystanders who might be in the way, or the driver. If God's going to always intervene to keep any harm from following, then in that sort of a world, science couldn't function. Because science is built on predictability in nature. And if we don't know that metal going against wood with a certain impact is going to have always a predictable force, a predictable result, we can't have science. Science depends on discovering these regularities in nature so that we can use them to advantage. But if there are no regularities, if one time when you jump, gravity may make you go down, but the next time, if harm would follow, when you jump, you rise up or go out vertically, There's no regularity for science to discover, and there can be no predictions based upon these scientific regularities. And it would also even remove the moral consequences from our deeds and actions. If I, by stealing money out of your bank or goods out of your house, if God will miraculously intervene to replace that money and replace those goods, for what crime am I going to be prosecuted? Have I really even done anything wrong? If I need it and you have it, and if I take yours, I know God will immediately replace it so you won't suffer. What jury is going to convict me? I haven't done you any harm. I'm no more to blame than the person who walks across another's property and some dust adheres to his shoes. He took it, it didn't belong to him, but it didn't hurt anybody, so what harm's done? No crime's committed. A contingent world, a created world, is a dependent world. And in any dependent world, there's going to be destruction. There's going to be death. There's going to be pain within the totality of its scheme of nature. Because animals feed on plants, and plants feed on the minerals in the soil, and human beings feed on both plants and animals. And even if human beings forego eating animals to eliminate animal pain, we may overpopulate an area and eat all the vegetation off of it and cause animals or other humans to die from starvation. Farrer speaks of this sort of thing as the mutual interference of systems. And the systems of any contingent world are necessarily going to be systems that interact with one another, and anything that interacts is going to create, well, in physics we just call it friction. On the larger scale, we'll say it'll create interference. And as these things interact on the level of subatomic particles, non-rational things, as well as human action, there is entropy, there is the incorporation of the whole or part of one system into another, there's waste, there's pain, there's death. Physical illnesses, for example, are often the result of interactions of contingent physical systems. Aging. Aging is the natural result of the interaction of contingent physical systems. A bone breaking because too much stress has been put on it in a fall. A lot of forms of cancer are, though painful, natural and inevitable phenomena in any contingent world. Decay is inherent within any physical system, and there's no possibility of any world that's material in its nature being free from the harmful effects of decay and interference. As Farrer puts it, well, if this is the general cause of physical ills, and if God knows it, why doesn't He just remove it? Put like that, the issue sounds simple. Poor limping world, why doesn't your kind Creator pull the thorn out of your paw? But what sort of thorn is that? And if it's pulled out, how much of a paw remains? How much indeed of creation? For what would a physical universe be like from which all mutual interference was eliminated? Well, the answer to that question is the only alternative to the kind of world we live in as an environment for rational creatures is a necessary and self-sufficient world. But even God can't create a necessary and self-sufficient world. For to say that it's necessary and self-sufficient is to say that it is not, was not, and did not need to be created. But if God created it, it's by definition other than self-sufficient and necessary. People's natural evils are inevitable within any world. I'm sure that this is at least as good as any possible world that God could have made. God just can't make a world where I can feel pleasure through a nervous system and yet not feel pain. Because the same nervous system that allows me to feel something soft like velvet that causes a sensation of pleasure also allows the possibility of my feeling pain if I touch something that's sharp, that's hot. And the same world that God creates in which I can experience love is a world in which that love, perhaps being unreturned, unrequited by its object, that same heart can also feel pain. Natural evils are not intrinsically evil, and in fact they're inevitable. They're just a part of a contingent world. And even God could not create a contingent world without these possibilities in it. And that's no limitation on God, not of His power, not of His wisdom. It's just in the nature of logical possibility. With that perspective on natural evil, we turn now to what's called moral evil or sin. Now, sin's the only intrinsic evil. Man's rebellion against God, man's inhumanity to his fellow man. Why did God create a world where there could be sin? The responsibility for sin in human experience certainly cannot be traced to God. Just as our humanity requires what I called a few moments ago circumstantial freedom, so that we can make honest mistakes or do things even that we know are against our best interest, like smoking or overeating or driving too fast on the highway. And those things can lead to natural evils. So also does our humanity require that we have moral freedom in the spiritual world. A moral freedom that can lead to moral evils. God didn't create us with a proneness to sin. But He did create us really free. In order to be really free, you have to be free to choose the wrong thing as well as the right thing. God created us really free. Not just with an illusion of freedom. But God gave us the power to choose between moral options. And our use of that freedom to do wrong, which is what we have done, using our freedom to rebel against God, using our freedom to hurt each other, that is in no way an indictment of the holiness of God. God could not have created us as human beings, that is, rational beings in His image, without giving us genuine freedom. Now, a distinction has been made. I hope it's clear in your mind. A distinction between natural evils and moral evils. A distinction between the kind of evil that's in the world, pain, suffering, death, volcanoes, hurricanes, tornadoes. Moral evil, murder, rape, lying, robbery, stealing. Two kinds of evil, two basic ways to approach it. Natural evils are in this world simply because of the set of necessary conditions that have to obtain in any contingent world, any created world. The only kind of world there can be. And moral evil here because God made us in His image free, really free, so that we could rebel against Him if we chose to do so, and defy what's good and what's best for us. Well, I want to look now briefly at some Old Testament books for some insights into this matter, and remember that the biblical approach to this problem is far more practical than philosophical. The Bible wasn't written for academicians. The Bible wasn't written for dusty towers. The Bible was written for common folk like us, trying to deal with the rough realities of life to help us. And the Bible is not full of speculative philosophy. The Bible's full of real life counsel and guidance. The first book of the Old Testament, the book of Genesis, the book of beginnings, tells of the origins of so many things. And in particular, for our purposes, it explains the origin of sin, moral evil in human experience. Rational and free, the first woman of the race was invited to eat of the fruit of a tree that had been put off limits by God. And Satan planted doubt in that woman's mind as to why God had forbidden that tree to her, and lied to her about the consequences of disobedience. He said it wouldn't be bad like God said it would be. You won't die. There won't be any bad consequence. There'll be a good consequence. And Satan appealed to the craving that was already within the woman for the fruit because it was good to look at and would have been desirable and pleasant to eat. And that set of circumstances created the environment where she was tempted. And she yielded and in turn gave the same fruit to Adam so he could repeat her act of disobedience. And just as God had said, Genesis 3 verse 3, in the day that you eat of it you'll surely die, the result of their rebellion was they died. They died spiritually, which is the death that's spoken of in verse 3. They died spiritually in the very day of their disobedience. Spiritual death is nothing more nor less than separation from God. And they were separated from God, from the free and open fellowship they'd had with Him in the garden. As a direct result, that very day of their sin, God came and He challenged them for what they'd done, and He drove them out of that perfect paradise home where He had such unrestricted fellowship with them. And of course, as an eventual consequence of what they did that day, they died physically as well as spiritually, because they were denied access to the tree of life as a result of being driven out of the garden. Well, the significance of Genesis to our study is that it exonerates God with regard to the problem of sin. Where did moral evil come from? The book of Genesis explains it. And Genesis says, God didn't create it. God didn't make us prone to sin. God made us good. God made us in His own image. God made us rational. God made us free. God put our original ancestral pair in a perfect paradise in which to live. Yes, they had some rational and moral and spiritual responsibilities, but that's a part of their being in God's image. That's a part of their being human. And when they chose not to live up to those requirements, when they defied God, when they broke the rules, that was the beginning of sin, and that was their choice, not forced on them. And the consequences that have come from that act, death and increased pain in childbirth, and difficulty in earning a living, and the other side effects of sin, all those are due to man's abuse of a good gift, freedom, and not the result of the will of God or any act of God that caused that fate to be forced upon us. Freedom is the greatest gift God has given us other than His own Son. And that freedom, directly exercised in relation to that greatest of all gifts, is the most proper use to which that freedom should be put. And God is not to be blasphemed for making us free. He is to be praised. We look to ourselves to censure because of sin. But a second book of the Old Testament that has a relevant message to this problem of evil is not only Genesis, but the book of Job. Job has the most extensive treatment of the problem of evil in Scripture. And again, it's not theoretical, it's very practical. The man Job was God-fearing, upright, and righteous. All of a sudden, however, life just seemed to tumble down around his ears. His 10 children were killed by a storm. His crops were all destroyed in the field. His flocks and herds were lost. And then agony of agonies. He lost his health. And with a particular loathsome and painful disease, Job was bereft of everything that had made his life to that time pleasant and fortunate and envied by his neighbors. And he was now broken and poor and suffering. Several suggestions are made in the book of Job as to how the presence of suffering in human experience is to be explained. First, from the prologue of the book in chapter 1, verses 6 through 12, it's explained that in the particular case of Job, his suffering was a challenge to his integrity and a challenge to his faith that Satan brought against him. In the second place, Job's friends reminded him that suffering often follows as the direct consequence of a person's sins. Job 4, verses 7 through 9. And of course, that's often the case. The alcoholic dies painfully of cirrhosis of the liver. That's the direct result of his sin. Third, Job himself offers the suggestion over in chapter 23, verse 10, that suffering sometimes is used to purify the person who's suffering, like gold being passed through the fire. It'll be purer for the experience. And then fourth, over in chapter 33, Elihu opines that suffering chastens and humbles children of God. There are at least those four major views in the book of Job as to why suffering in particular instances occurs among human beings. And each of those views has something to say for it. Certainly Satan is a tempter and challenger of all of us in many ways. Satan himself not created bad, but Satan himself coming to be the arch rival of God and the tempter of the souls of men, because he, like Adam and Eve, created originally good and pure himself, but with freedom, an angelic being with freedom, used his freedom the wrong way, and being under condemnation, desiring now to bring us under it too. He does try to seduce people into sin. He did Eve. He tried to destroy Job by breaking the man. That's a partial explanation. Yes, people do sometimes suffer as the direct consequences of their sin. That's true. The alcoholic, the gambler, the adulterer who loses his wife and children when his affair becomes known. Yes, it can purify. Yes, it can humble and chasten, but no one of those is a complete answer to the problem of suffering. And especially does the book of Job warn us against seeing all suffering as a punishment of God for the sins of the person who is suffering. Job wasn't suffering as punishment for sin. He was suffering precisely because he was a good man. Jesus in John chapter 9 challenged the traditional view that all suffering is the result of one's personal sin. When his disciples walked by and saw a man born blind and said, "Why, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he should be born blind?" They had the view of Job's three friends, his miserable comforters, that all suffering is the direct consequence of sin. God's punishing you for something you've done. And people, that idea is still around, and it isn't just among Calvinistic religious groups, it's among our people. And sometimes it's hard for people to have the proper sympathy and compassion in their hearts for the unfortunate, because our glib answer is, people wouldn't be in that situation if they didn't deserve it. A lot of people are in terrible agony tonight, not because they're shiftless, lazy, sorry scum, but because they've suffered the sort of misfortunes that could befall you or me. In spite of everything they knew to do as decent, honorable, good, hard-working, God-fearing people. The economy turns bad, an investment turns sour, health breaks. The book of Job certainly warns us against being the miserable comforters who can't really be compassionate toward people who are suffering because we think, well, they're suffering because they deserve it. They've done something. God's punishing them. The response to suffering that's recommended in the book of Job is essentially this. You can't always know in a particular instance why misfortune has come to you. And so, if it should come your lot to face what Job had to face, if you lose your health, if you go broke, if the economy in your country, in your city, at your house bottoms out in a period of recession, humble yourself before God and trust the Almighty to see you through what may have been life's darkest hour for you to this point. and believe that God loves and cares and is still there, and that He'll not abandon you, and that if you'll seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, the things you need will be provided. In fact, the single point of chapters 38 through 42 appears to be that Job must learn to walk by faith, not by sight. That is, he must learn to trust God's faithfulness in things that can't be fully grasped by limited human perspective and knowledge. You see, the thing we forget sometimes is we read the story of Job after we've read the prologue. We know why this is happening. Job didn't know why it was happening to him. And in the New Testament, he's held up to us as an example of steadfastness, precisely because when he didn't have all the answers, he didn't know why this was happening to him. He wouldn't curse God. He wouldn't say, God's abandoned me, and therefore I'll abandon Him. And you know, a lot of times when we are suffering, and we suffer for different reasons, and in a given instance, I can't always know why this catastrophe or why that heartache or this grief. The best counsel I can give you or to myself is, like the rodeo rider on the bronc, just grab on for all you're worth and hold on. Just hold on for all you're worth. Hold on to all you know of God and His love and His care and His compassion, and trust Him. Trust Him. And when this dark hour passes, maybe then it'll be clearer, or even if you never understand why it happened, the grace of God will be even sweeter, because it has proved once again to be sufficient for you in all your needs. The value of Job to us is the example that it gives us of steadfastness and perseverance. And that's why in the book of James, James chapter 5, verse 11, James is holding him up, Job, as our example of what it is to be faithful under those difficult circumstances. Many a broken heart has found its courage to go on by reading Job. And then finally, there's Habakkuk. Habakkuk is unique in all the minor prophets. The other prophets plead with the people on behalf of God, but Habakkuk pleads with God on behalf of a suffering, stricken people. Prophesying just on the eve of Nebuchadnezzar's invasion of Judah in 606 BC, Habakkuk was puzzled as to why God would allow that to happen. Why would God use a people even more wicked than Judah to punish His chosen people? Now that's certainly another form of the problem of evil. Well, the key verse of the entire book is Habakkuk 2, verse 4. It says, "The righteous shall live by his faith." Against the background of the disaster that lay ahead for the southern kingdom, the theme of Habakkuk is the individual who remains faithful to God and trusts Him through that ordeal. God will enable him to survive, to withstand, and overcome. In effect, Habakkuk says, God will always be true to Himself, and He will deliver the person who maintains his integrity, who keeps divine commandments, who holds his faith amidst difficult circumstances. And for our purposes, we simply say that God's dealings are always with us on an individual basis. And even if it's the case that a society brings calamity upon itself and people, there are Christians over in Poland who are wondering how they'll survive the national calamity, the chaos, now the martial law. Who knows what may happen in our society? The promise of the book of Habakkuk is no matter what happens, for good or for ill, especially in the life of a nation or society, that individual who maintains his faith in God, the righteous shall live by his faith. God won't abandon His people. The Old Testament approach to the problem of evil in a world created by a merciful God demonstrates that biblical religion is not an exercise in glib, shallow optimism. It's a realistic religion. It faces harsh realities and gives us strength for facing them. And it also tells us that God is concerned for the sufferer. And if we're God's children, and we are the fortunate ones not to be suffering in the given instance, our compassion is to go out. And when our time comes to suffer, we're willing to lean upon that compassion from others. Yes, we've got to challenge the unbeliever when he tries with the problem of evil to overthrow faith. But even more, we've got to demonstrate compassion and love to that individual sufferer who may be within our sphere of influence and whose burden we can help lift just a little by caring, by praying, by helping with money or food or whatever way we can, to be another proof to him that God has not abandoned him. Our God lives. And the sin and suffering in the world, while harsh realities and challenging, only prove to us how much more we need that God. And rather than destroying faith, give faith its purpose.